So, the translations are out for My Hero Academia Manga Chapter 400, and let's just say that this chapter is probably going to be very controversial as being the 400th chapter of My Hero Academia, and it's going to be for very mundane reasons. But hey, that ending though is pretty much on point, so you know what? I think that this is going to be an amazing chapter, and you're probably, hopefully, going to think the same. Hey guys, how's it going? It is your boy, Manga Mandrew, and I'm here to do my review for My Hero Academia Manga Chapter 400. We finally made it. It has been 400 chapters in the making, and most likely a little bit more left to go, but this is very much a milestone for My Hero Academia, as any manga reaching a pinnacle point like this, because in reality, not a lot of manga can actually go for as long as My Hero Academia has, because it's been going on for almost 9 years, and when it comes to this chapter, nothing really massive happens. We don't get any, big reveals, wink. Nor is this something that is, extremely impactful about the story, but either way, there are some interesting things that we really need to talk about when it comes to this chapter, so I'm going to be talking about them very soon. So, let's just dive right into the chapter and really talk about what's going on. And for starters, the title of the chapter is Chapter 400, To the Limit. And this is just going to be a running idea when it comes to the fight between All For One and All Might, who is able to push the other to the limits and whether or not there are limits that they can actually break through. And we see that a lot of this chapter is going to be focusing on that limit. And it's funny enough that we start off with how we not left off last chapter, but returning back to the confrontation between Kunita and Aoyama, as well as Hagakure, where the chapter begins with Hagakure being in the nude. And that doesn't seem to be weird, but this time she's actually visible. And this is where a little bit of the controversy comes in, and I'm not going to dive a whole bunch into it, but I'm just going to give my own 2 cents. One, I do not think that this is sexualization. Yes, she is naked, but she isn't in any provocative situation, aka doing a type of pose or being explicitly showing it off in a more sexual way. All she really is just naked and covers herself up, a natural reaction whether or not you are male or female. Also, this scene could just most likely be a reference to chapter 200, where we actually get to see a more comedic scene with Hagakure when she's covered in mushrooms and she notices and is embarrassed that her, quote, curves are showing. So this is very much building upon that idea, potentially showing how she's actually uncomfortable with actually being visibly seen, but is okay when nothing is actually showing. And that's kind of my deal with it, that if it's something that is nude or they're showing a lot of skin, it's not necessarily sexualization, because that is just something that is natural when it comes to people. We are just naturally not wearing any clothing, really. As in, we're just born naked. That is just our natural state of being. We aren't born with any type of external covering when we are born. That's just the natural state. And when it comes to a country like Japan, where they have very much more public bathing, nudity is a lot more acceptable whether or not you are male or female, older or younger. That's just how the culture is more expressing of these type of ideas in reference to more traditional American and Western ideals. Also, it's used for humor, and frankly, whether or not you're in Japan or America, someone being naked is a little bit hilarious, especially if they're not intentionally meant to be naked, which is ironic because she's always naked, so it's a little bit of dissonance there, but I think it's just fine. But that's not really important, because we see that Hagakure does the quick reaction and brings up the idea that, oh my gosh, I'm visible, that was literally my only thing, most likely referencing to the fact that she doesn't really have that much to her besides her invisibility in the story. But we do see that because of her invisibility and what she's made of, because of having that type of quirk, she's able to relatively with ease use Aoyama's lasers to pretty much get rid of the plants that are sucking the life out of the heroes that are there. So there is a reasoning why she is necessary for this moment. And how she begins to ponder why she's been visible at this moment, as well as implying that this is something that she's been trying to work on for assumedly a while or her entire life. And then she comes to a realization that maybe it has something to do with Aoyama and his lasers being stronger, instead of it just being her overdoing herself, being in danger, and just the invisibility coming to a glitch. And while Hagakure is is probably the controversy of this chapter, we get a little bit more depth for what's going to be happening potentially to Aoyama later on in the story, with the implication that after he makes sure all of the heroes are saved and that he will do all of this, making sure that the people are safe, that today is probably going to be his last day as a UA student and that he'll go to any length. And when it came to my first initial explanation or trying to infer what's going on here, I thought that he was just going to be leaving UA and he's no longer going to be a student, and how he may actually potentially go more directly into hero work because of the fact that he's a traitor, or he could just end up going back to jail. That was most likely my initial implications for this scene. However, with more of the proper images as well as a better translation forward, I think the implication is that Aoyama may be sacrificing his life in this moment, because while yes, his quirk is getting stronger, it may not be able to be withheld within his body anymore, and that potentially him continuously using his laser with a body not meant for a laser-like quirk may eventually lead to his death. So this could be seeding the ideas that Aoyama could potentially die in the future, and that's something interesting that I would like to see if Horikoshi will actually go through with it. But enough of that speculation. The rest of this chapter is pretty much the fight between All For One and All Might, where we see that the laser that he is shooting at All For One at this moment was apparently heavily inspired by Stars and Stripes, really showing that the fight between Tomura for All and Stars and Stripes actually has an effect on the characters in the long run when it came to this idea of using a laser to pin down All For One in the ground, very much how Star and Striped pinned down Tomura for All into the ocean ground and the ocean floor. As we also get more reveals of the more or less last quirks that are sort of incorporated into the suit, where we see sound waves, airflow jack pinning All For One on the ground as he's trying to climb out of the laser, as well as we get to see Creati morphing armor, as well as Great Shoes binding spheres, also binding All For One to the ground as a laser is hitting him. And we do get implications that this laser is not going to hold on for long, because of the fact that it's beginning to overheat. But also we get an explanation for how what happened in the previous chapter was more or less planned by All Might himself, luring All For One into a certain location to eventually fire the laser on him. Where we also get another reveal of the invisible girl part of the armor, which is not necessarily making him invisible, but making him more resistant to heat, aka the laser firing. And how even though he used Tailman to try and pin All For One and get away, which allowed him to not be hit by the laser, he realizes that his legs are very much messed up and he most likely is unable to move them. And how he questions that the reasoning why he isn't dead in this moment is because All For One is so focused on torturing him at this moment that he isn't thinking the most logically and strategically at this moment. But even with all of that, even All Might himself recognizes that he's pretty much on his last legs, because even after he was able to do all of this to pin All For One to the ground, he realizes that the only reasoning why I'm still moving is because I am laughing, and as soon as I stop laughing, the pain is going to kick in. And that is when we actually cut over to what we're assuming is just a random place in the world between a young man and his grandmother. Or should I say a young boy and his grandmother, as the boy asks about the hero that is on screen and the grandmother's saying like, oh yeah, no, I'm not really big on hero stuff and I have no idea who this is. Which is very interesting because it means that the implication is that A, not everyone knows what All Might looks like within his shrunken, shriveled up state, and that for as much as we would like to say that heroism is very much popular around the world, that there are still certain areas where heroes don't really get a lot of recognition or are very knowledgeable of, especially when it comes to the older generation. But even with all of that, there's really a necessity to see this. Not only is it a little bit more of world building, but it really just shows what it means to be a hero and how heroes are able to more or less connect to people, whether they are there in person or just through their ideals. Because as the boy questions what this means for them, the grandmother says that nothing's really going to affect them in a foreign country where they live. But even this young child, this young individual, is still hoping for this hero's success. Not because it'll have any real effect on him, at least from the perception that he got from his grandmother, but because this is just the inherent nature of what heroism does. that by its inherent nature, heroism is able to inspire others and lead to them supporting the heroes themselves to eventually reach a more understanding and more like successful conclusion for people everywhere. So if anything, this is just really a symbolic nature to it, as we see that his belief right now adds to a previous scene that we've seen of the leaves flying through the air, which represents the connections and the beliefs and the support that the entirety of people will eventually be having towards All Might in this moment. But even with all of that symbolism aside, eventually the laser breaks apart and gets destroyed, as we see All For One climbing out of the hole that he was in, glowing, which could be a reference to the first individual that had a quirk in China, the glowing baby. And the implication could be that All For One was that glowing baby, or that he stole that glowing baby's quirk. Which either one makes a little bit more sense or is understandable for the character of All For One being the first quirk user, or that he would be so maniacal and evil that he would steal the quirk of the first person to ever have one. Both ways to show his dominance over others. And we eventually see that even within this state, he is shown to be extremely young and very much that of a young child, even in this state, chastising All Might and All Might calling him a rugrat as he's about to send these like fleshy tendrils out towards All For One, out towards All Might, but suddenly he cannot move as a voice is heard from the background with a very blood-curdling line of "We all bleed the same red blood," as we see All Might going in for the attack. Someone with a sword, as it is revealed that this individual in a double-page spread is Stain, licking the blood of All For One off some rubble as All Might goes in with a smile to apparently deliver the final blow. And this is a great way, at the very least, to end chapter 400. Because all in all, while this wasn't a sort of milestone chapter, it ends in a very spectacular way with the potential conclusion of the fight between All Might and All For One. And overall, I really did enjoy this chapter. The Hagakure stuff, depending on who you are, was enjoyable. I found it very hilarious, but also the implication of what's going to be going on with Aoyama's character was also very interesting. As well as that small snippet of the chapter just focusing once again on another part of the world and really showing how this battle in Japan isn't just in Japan, but it's something that is actually going to be an effect around the world, and how many people around the world are having faith in the heroes even if they cannot do it directly or if they believe that it won't affect them directly. Just really showing that there is no limit to what heroes can do and how much reach a hero can actually have. As well as the final parts of this chapter, just pretty much showing that this fight is going to be coming to an end, and that the idea that All For One is doing this and fighting All Might, and how All Might is doing this alone, is not going to be the case. So people with that argument that this is something that All Might wouldn't do because he wouldn't be fighting this alone because it goes against his arc and his story, yeah, this chapter pretty much proves that to be false. But yeah, that's all I really have to say about this chapter. I thought it was good. As always, the art is amazing, and really the storytelling is very much neat and concise within this chapter as it tells its own story along with the larger story as a whole. But what did you think of the chapter? Did you like it? Did you dislike it? And are you okay with the Hagakure stuff? Leave your stuff down below, leave a like on the video, and don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel if you want to see more content like this. Do all that cool jazz, and hopefully I'll be able to catch you in my next video. Goodbye!